The news media is currently broadcasting a simple and scary narrative about the global energy market. They're telling you that the Strait of Hormuz is completely closed and that this total military blockade is the sole reason your gas and grocery bills are suddenly skyrocketing. If you look at the actual maritime tracking data, however, this isn't the case. The strait is not closed, but has instead been transformed into a highly lucrative geopolitical toll booth. And the specific countries that are being allowed to pass for free are using this massive structural advantage to permanently hijack the global economy. My name is Guy, and you're watching The Coin Bureau. Following the outbreak of military operations in the Middle East, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, immediately threatened to shut down the most critical energy choke point on the planet. Under normal conditions, the Strait of Hormuz facilitates the transit of approximately 20% of the world's seaborne oil and liquefied natural gas. That equates to roughly 17 to 20 million barrels of oil flowing through that narrow waterway every single day. When the conflict escalated, major energy companies immediately invoked force majeure. Shipping insurance premiums skyrocketed by 500%, and the media declared the strait a dead zone. The International Energy Agency, or IEA, quickly labelled this the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market, warning of consequences far worse than the oil shocks of the 1970s. To the average retail investor watching the evening news, it looks like a total, uncompromising military blockade. But if you bypass the headlines and look directly at the raw maritime tracking data provided by Lloyd's List Intelligence, a massive contradiction emerges. Between the 1st of March and the 25th of March 2026, exactly 142 ships successfully transited the Strait of Hormuz. Now, compared to the 2,652 vessels that crossed during the exact same period last year, this represents a staggering 94.6% collapse in total traffic. But 142 transits is absolutely not zero. It's the equivalent of what would normally pass through in a single day and a half, stretched out over an entire month. Even President Trump recently acknowledged during a press briefing that Iran had allowed 10 oil tankers to pass through as a so-called goodwill gesture. Furthermore, Iran's own mission to the United Nations released a formal statement clarifying that non-hostile vessels would still be permitted to transit, provided they coordinate with competent Iranian authorities. The official story, though, is that the strait is a war zone where nothing survives. But the data proves that the strait is actually a highly functioning, heavily regulated checkpoint where specific ships are being granted safe passage. You just have to ignore the military posturing and start looking at the underlying finances. And speaking of uncovering these hidden geopolitical financial mechanisms before they hit the mainstream headlines, this is exactly why you need the Coin Bureau Telegram channel. It's where we break down the latest breaking news, provide deep dive alpha, and give you the most important market updates, all pinged directly to your device. So sign up today using the link down below or by scanning the QR code on the screen. Now, let's look at exactly how this selective transit system actually operates. Vessels seeking to enter or exit the Persian Gulf can no longer use the traditional international shipping lanes. Instead, they're being forced to detour into a highly specific, Tehran-approved corridor located entirely within Iranian territorial waters, just north of Larak Island. Before a ship is even allowed to approach this corridor, the shipping company must submit a mountain of documentation to intermediaries connected directly to the IRGC. They must hand over complete cargo manifests, ultimate beneficial ownership records, destination ports, and comprehensive crew lists. If the paperwork is approved, the vessel is issued a cryptographic clearance code and is often forced to accept an armed IRGC naval escort through the strait. We know this vetting is strictly enforced because ships that fail to comply have been explicitly turned back. And if a vessel attempts to transit without this clearance code, they face a gauntlet of 6,000 deployed sea mines, drone swarms, and GPS spoofing technology. But of course, this clearance code is not being handed out for free. According to statements from Iranian lawmakers and corroborated by maritime intelligence firms, Iran is charging a transit fee of up to $2 million per vessel. So, Iran has effectively suspended the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which guarantees the right of transit passage, and replaced it with a sovereign extortion racket. And the Iranian parliament is actively drafting formal legislation to permanently codify this fee structure into their national law. They're attempting to transform a temporary wartime military tactic into a permanent, recognized sovereign revenue mechanism. Iranian state media has brazenly projected that if traffic ever returned to pre-war levels, this toll system could generate upwards of $100 billion in annual revenue. That would completely replace their heavily sanctioned oil export revenue with an unsanctionable, unavoidable transit tax. But perhaps the most significant part of this new system is not the $2 million price tag, but the currency in which that price must be paid. Multiple vessels have already been confirmed paying this exorbitant safe passage fee, and the transactions are not being settled in United States dollars. They're being settled entirely in Chinese yuan. By forcing shipping companies to pay in yuan, Iran is conditioning access to this vital energy corridor on participation in the non-dollar financial system. They're using China's SIPS payment system, which processed $245 trillion in 2025, to completely bypass the SWIFT network and the legacy financial system. This is a massive structural flaw for Western sanctions, acting as a direct catalyst for the erosion of petrodollar dominance. But this $2 million toll does not apply equally to everyone. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has explicitly designated a formal list of friendly nations that are eligible for preferential transit coordination. And that list includes China, Russia, India, Pakistan, Iraq, and Bangladesh. Pakistan's foreign minister even confirmed that they secured a diplomatic agreement allowing 20 Pakistani-flagged ships to transit the strait safely. And this preferential treatment is creating a devastating two-tier global energy market. Now, Asian oil refineries were originally built and optimized to process the heavy, sour crude oil that comes from the Persian Gulf. And because their governments have secured diplomatic access through the Larak Island corridor, these eastern refineries are still getting their hands on that sour crude. Meanwhile, Western buyers are completely locked out of the physical Middle Eastern market. And this dynamic caused physical Dubai crude to skyrocket to an astonishing $169 per barrel at its peak, creating a historic $55 premium over Western benchmarks. But because the BRICS-aligned nations have diplomatic access, they're negotiating massive below-market rate discounts directly with Iran and Russia. So, the East is paying the toll in yuan and securing discounted energy, while the West is forced to scramble for alternative supplies from Latin America and West Africa. The catastrophic implications of this two-tier energy system become clear when we look at the exact transmission mechanism of this energy shock into the broader macroeconomic landscape. The mainstream narrative wants you to believe that this is just a temporary disruption for shipping companies. But the reality is that this $2 million toll acts as an indirect tax on every single retail consumer and investor in the Western Hemisphere. Just look at the United States national average for on-highway diesel fuel. As of late March 2026, the price of diesel has surged to $5.37 per gallon. That's a 52.8% increase in just 8 weeks, with states like California seeing prices exceed $7 per gallon. Now compare that to domestic diesel prices in Russia and India, which have seen effectively 0% change over the exact same period. This is the starkest visual evidence of the two-tier energy system in action. And because diesel powers the entire global logistics network, this price shock is already destroying supply chains. Major carriers like FedEx and UPS have repeatedly hiked their fuel surcharges to between 25 and 28%. Even the United States Postal Service has filed for its first ever competitive product fuel surcharge of 8%, explicitly warning that the agency could run out of cash by 2027 without it. Furthermore, 30% of the global ammonia-based nitrogen fertilizer supply is currently suspended due to the blockade. Now, every 10-cent rise in the price of diesel adds approximately 0.1% to the consumer price index. With a $1.80 spike in fuel costs and a massive fertilizer shortage too, we're looking at an unavoidable surge in food and grocery prices that will fully materialize by the summer of 2026. And this is where the traditional banking cartel finds itself in a dilemma. The Federal Reserve has officially held its benchmark interest rate at an effective 3.64%, and its options from here are limited. If the Fed raises interest rates to fight this new wave of inflation, it will crush an already fragile economy and trigger a severe recession. If it cuts interest rates, though, to stimulate growth, it risks entrenching this oil shock inflation permanently and completely de-anchoring consumer expectations. Meanwhile, over in Europe, the European Central Bank is facing an even worse scenario, with Goldman Sachs now projecting they will be forced to hike rates by 25 basis points in both April and June. You cannot use monetary policy to fix a geopolitical supply shortage. You cannot rate hike Iran into reopening the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, the bond market understands this perfectly, which is why the 10-year United States Treasury yield is sitting elevated at 4.44%, while gold has exploded to $4,492 per ounce. Institutional capital is fleeing to hard assets because they know this inflation is structurally sticky, and the situation could be about to reach boiling point. Donald Trump has issued a hard, uncompromising military ultimatum to Tehran. He set a firm deadline of Monday, the 6th of April at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for Iran to fully and unconditionally reopen the strait. If they refuse, the United States military has threatened to obliterate Iranian civilian power generation infrastructure. Iran, meanwhile, has expressed its intention of retaliating by striking similar targets across the Gulf region. And the options market is pricing in this exact apocalyptic scenario. There's been a tenfold increase in derivative bets that Brent crude will violently spike to $150 per barrel by the end of April. If oil hits $150, analysts warn that the global economy faces a synchronized recession rivaling the 1973 oil crisis. The IEA has authorized a record 400 million barrel release from strategic reserves, but analysts confirm that only covers about 20 days of lost supply. The catastrophic costs of a fractured supply chain are already being passed on to consumers across the world, but this is only the beginning. Now, on the one hand, the fact that 142 ships managed to transit the strait in March provides a tiny sliver of short-term relief. It proves that some crude oil is still flowing to Asian markets, preventing an immediate 100% total blackout of global energy supplies. The diplomatic backchannels, specifically through Pakistan, are keeping a fraction of the world's logistics network barely on life support. But, on the other hand, the long-term systemic cost of this arrangement is absolutely devastating for the West. Iran has successfully proven that it can selectively throttle the global economy, exempt its geopolitical allies, and force its enemies to pay the ultimate price. By demanding multi-million-dollar tolls settled exclusively in Chinese yuan, they are accelerating the de-dollarization agenda at an alarming pace. The two-tier energy market all but guarantees that Western manufacturers will face a permanent competitive disadvantage. So, while Eastern economies run on discounted yuan-settled crude, Western businesses will be crushed under the weight of $5.37 diesel, 500% insurance premiums, and paralyzed central banks. This is no longer just a military conflict over a narrow strip of water. It's a highly coordinated financial siege designed to permanently transfer industrial power from west to east. And that's probably not really what the US and Israel had in mind when they began this war just a month ago. But what do you think? Is this two-tier energy market the beginning of the end for Western industrial dominance? Or is this $2 million toll booth just a temporary wartime extortion tactic that will inevitably collapse under the pressure of the 6th of April military deadline? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you want to understand exactly how the BRICS nations are building a completely alternative financial settlement system using blockchain technology, well, you can check out our video on that right over here. And if you want to dive deeper into how central bank policy paralysis is secretly draining your purchasing power, you can check out that video right over here. Okay, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. This is Guy, signing off.